Unsafe Building from The Alarm on Revenge of the 80s Radio. Mike Peters, the longtime frontman for the band, has a new album with The Alarm. Stream Hurricane of Change. We're honored to have Mike Peters with us now to talk about it. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Great to be on Revenge of the 80s.
Well, it's great to have you here. The new album. It's also your one-man rock theater show.
That's right. Yeah, it's a really a reimagining of the original 1987 to 1990 period of the Alarm's history when we made the albums Eye of the Hurricane, Electric Folklore and Change. And I just saw a lot of parallels in the lyric between then and now. You know, at the time of writing it, there was a big change going on in the 80s, especially in Europe. The Berlin Wall was coming down and the idea of free movement was being introduced right across the European continent. And then recently, late last year, 30 years on, it was almost the opposite. We were talking about Brexit. With big changes happening to Europe and Britain and isolation coming in and America had a different kind of president. It felt like it was a hurricane of change blowing to our world again and right through to 2020. So I re-recorded all the albums as if they'd just been written in 2019 to get it across, I wrote a story that linked all the songs and that was how I explained the music concept to the musicians in the studio and the producer. And we did it song by song, and I wouldn't let them see past one song to the next. I said, this is the story, and so we could respond to the music as the story dynamic was relayed to everybody and laid out. So it was a great project to do. And, sadly, it's been disrupted by the pandemic, but, it's creating a world of its own out there on the internet, so it's a good thing.
That's true. It'll be nice when you're allowed to perform in front of crowds again.
Oh yeah, I think not only I can't wait for that, but all the Alarm fans around the world longing for that day to come as well, and I'm sure it will arrive before we know it.
What they're going to be treated to with your live show, and of course in Stream Hurricane of Change, are a lot of new tracks. Like you said, you do have some older Alarm tracks, well, the later Alarm tracks from the mid to late 80s, and different versions of them.
That's right, yeah. I think, the songs stay with you as they go through your life. They change. The meaning changes as you grow as a human being. When I look at some of the early songs, like Strength, for instance, that song was written in 1985, but it's followed me around my life and become a massive part of it in light of myself becoming diagnosed with leukemia and living with cancer. And I'm the sort of person who needs someone to give them their lifeblood to stay alive. And that's what the song sings about. And so it's more relevant than ever. And the recordings in the 80s, they're time stamps. That's all they are. They're a representation of the music as it lived at that time. And we can't wipe those tapes. They're always going to be there, but the songs move on through life and gather momentum in different ways and gather different listenerships, and they take on new meanings. And I think it's really important that we are able to reflect that in when it got to our 30th anniversary. I remade every single Alarm album just to see that it was capable of standing the test of time and that the songs could live in the modern environments. And I'm really proud to say I think they all do. The Alarm is built on an acoustic guitar with chords and a melody and a lyric, and that is where the Alarm lives. That is the true beating heart of the sound of the Alarm that has resonated down the decade.
That's true, and I was always an early Alarm guy, and I know that the Stand still stands, if you will, the test of time. But this album, at least the music in that, and what you discuss here, is focusing on those later years, the mid to late 80s. And from what I remember, things were a bit rocky within the band, and that tells part of the story as well.
Absolutely, yeah. We sort of hit our midlife crisis or mid-decade crisis. After 1986, we got to a real high in America, and we played the big UCLA Spirit of 86 concert, and we'd come home to play with Queen and did 2 shows at Wembley Stadium, and everything was moving in the right direction. But then we sort of changed track as about all of a sudden the band didn't want to work the way they had done on the previous albums. They didn't want to work on the songs that were put forward. They wanted to the group decided to try and move into a more organic entity where songs would just be born in the rehearsal room or as they arrived, and that's not who we were. The Alarm was founded on the traditions of Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, or Bob Dylan, or John Lennon and Paul McCartney, or Joe Strummer and Mick Jones. it was we were songwriters first, and then we built a band out of the songwriting partnerships or songwriters that existed in the band. And when we tried to shift that dynamic, it had a really detrimental effect to the well-being of the band, and stories got out that we were breaking up, and it really curtailed our momentum in a huge way, and we didn't end up coming out with a follow-up record to Strength, which had been a big record for us till almost 2 years later, and it was too late by then. You two had reached the Joshua Tree, In Excess had come out with Kick, and Simple Minds had come out with, Once Upon a Time, and all those big albums, and we would have been before those groups, if we'd had the same foresight and followed the direction that we normally would have taken after Strength and focused on the songs that had been written. We'd have come out with our third album in early '87, not at the end of of that year. And things might have been different then, but we'd have carried on the same momentum that we'd had built up in 1986 from, that started in 1981 with the song you played at the top of the show with Unsafe Building. So that was of our own making. That part of the fall of the 80s for the Alarm was part of our own creation. We all have to hold up our hands collectively because we all played a part in that. And we can't look back to that and change it. We move on, and this is where we are now.
Looking back at the songs, and as I said before, you do include them in the new album, Stream Hurricane of Change. Looking back at these, Mike, what kinds of memories do they sometimes bring up to you when you play them in the newer Mike Peters style, whether it be, of course, in the recording studio or live?
Well, it's a very autobiographical story. The Alarm has been built on that. When you look at songs like Spirit of 76, from our Strength album, it's a true life story. The people mentioned in the song are real, the incidents are real, the influences are real, the heady days it talks about happened. There is a sign on the wall in Matthew Street that's dedicated to the Beatles that says 4 lads who shook the world. It's about reality, and that's what Stream Hurricane of Change is, really. And at the time, because of all the internal struggles that were going on in the Alarm, I was just working from one song to the next, and I felt like a lot of my energy was going into keeping the band together and I think somewhere in there I got lost to see, eluded me what the real picture was we were trying to create in that record. And so when I came to look at it 30 years later, I started with the first lyric, and it was only then, 30 years on, that I realized the first lyric of that creative period came from 1986, and it was a song called "In New South Wales." But that song was the very last song to be released on the album Change from 1989. It was the last song we had out of the decade. And so I started with that lyric and thought, okay, what am I trying to say here? And who am I talking about? This guy walking home alone past a church full of mourning souls at the end of an era. But where's he going? And I looked through the lyrics I had of all 39, and I thought, well, there's one about a city there. It's called Newtown. Maybe he's going there. Yes, he is going there. That lyrics make sense. And all of a sudden, the journey started. And then from there, it went to some of the newer songs that I'd written. Well, they were new for the time, but they were written in 1986, 87. I just never presented them to the band because they didn't want to work with complete finished songs with chord structures and lyrics. So all of a sudden I looked at them and thought, they carry this, here's the meaning of these records, here's the true meaning of these records. So I think there's more in these albums now than was possibly revealed in their original recording sessions and their original release timeframes in 87 to 89. So to me, I felt a lot of, I thought there was a closure came to me because of that. I thought I could understand why people felt the way they did and tried to take us into directions that didn't work. But I also realized why I was dedicated to the cause of trying to say the Alarm is founded on songs, and that's what we have to really focus on, which is where we carried on from. That's how we survived through that terrible time. And we did come out on the upside and made some great records, and we had some great tours. But the damage had been done, the cracks were there, and once that sort of fissures open, it's very hard to close those again, especially when the lives of people change through success, through touring, through wanting to go and live in different continents, and all of a sudden the band that grew up in real North Wales and was founded in a small town is trying to evolved, but from a global stance. You've got to fly your drummer in from San Francisco to be at a rehearsal room in London, and then book hotels for it. It takes all the spontaneity out of the situation, and all of a sudden you've got a problem on your hands that's like a bit like a runaway train, and no matter what you try to do to stop it, you cannot. Destiny is in control at that point, and you have to accept the fate that gets handed your way when the hammer comes down.
Mike Peters is with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio. We're talking about his new album, Stream Hurricane of Change. Each track comes with a narration. You talked about that before, part of an essay about your own journey as a songwriter, Mike. And I must add, the narrations are in the style of good radio. You talk over some of the music, which makes it sound nice and smooth. You don't just break up the tracks.
Thank you. I have to, that has to go, credit for that has to go to George Williams, the record producer, because I really only wrote the story of almost as a storyline for the musicians to follow, so that when they could feel the sense of cataclysm when we started recording the opening song in New South Wales, but then they could also feel the joy of returning through the story of leaving home and coming back to your roots. And so that was able to dictate the pace of the music, the tone of the music, so the feel of the song, how we portrayed it, and it was George said, Mike, we're recording each song after you tell us a story, and you won't let us go to the next song till we finish this song. And he said, and now that those words they're part of the record. They are what is going to make sense. That's how we're making sense of all these 39 pieces of music because of your story, and the listeners are going to need to hear that as well. And obviously, I was a big fan of Dylan Thomas growing up in Wales. He's our national poet, if you like, and I've got some of his records on the old Caedmon label, and I used to love listening to his voice. It's so deep and resonating, and even in 1987 we had an intro tape with Dylan Thomas speaking over it. So it sort of come from the same time frame, and except it's not Dylan Thomas speaking it, it's me, but I do it in my best Welsh tone. And like you say, I learned how to speak over some of the music as well to give it some pathos.
Mike, let's talk about some of the tracks. The first release, the first video, of course, Irish Sea. The way you even describe it kind of takes us exactly where you're going here. I understand the video was produced at a real beach.
That's right, it was, yeah. It was shot in one take on the seafront, and the beach where I was brought up and still live is part of the Irish Sea. They always say the Irish are the Welsh that could swim when the invasion happened in Old Britain, and the Normans and the Romans came. They're the Welsh, the original Welsh that swam across to Ireland, and the other way of saying it is that the Welsh are the Irish that can't swim, and we got left behind. But the Irish Sea it's informed my horizon or my life. Still now, I'm looking out the window and I'm looking across the sea. And there's the Irish Sea, and that's always been my horizon. That's the beauty of living in Wales, is we're afforded a beautiful landscape. We're never trapped behind concrete walls or high-rise buildings. We can always walk into the hillsides, the mountains, out onto the beach, and feel that sense of freedom that horizon gives you when your eyes are allowed to wander endlessly, and then that's where your dreams seem to come from. That's where your future lies, and I've been lucky to have that every day of my life, pretty much.
It's interesting. It's kind of like the Proclaimers when they sing their songs about the landscape and the beauty of Wales. This is a lot like that. This is definitely very descriptive about that. And I must add that Wales has a heck of a wooden roller coaster somewhere there. So I gotta ride that one of these days. Mike,
I'm sure you will.
Mike Peters is with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio. Mike, are you a boxing fan? Because I enjoyed the song where you paid homage to Randolph Turpin.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of blood sports and that, but I was brought up in a public house, a pub in Wales. My dad was the publican, and he was behind the bar, and it was the culture that boxing was a big thing for working class people in Britain. It was a sport that people really looked up to. It still is a massive sport to this day, isn't it? And there was Randolph Turpin, the boxer, who was a world champion fighter, beat Sugar Ray Robinson in a fight in Britain. He trained and lived in North Wales, and his story was a bit of a legend amongst all of us young people here, because he was someone everyone aspired to. He'd come from small towns, small back streets, and he fought his way to the top of the world. And there was a BBC documentary shown at the time, and it really captured us, our imaginations. And I thought I could write a song. I'd like to write a song about Randolph Turpin, and started doing the research. And this is obviously in 1986, 87. And I knew some of the family members, and I approached them to get some of the facts checked. And all of a sudden, one night in the darkness, in 2 or 3 in the morning, there was a big banging on my door at my home here in my village. And I went downstairs and looked out, and there was some heavy guys. And I asked them through the window, "What's going on?" They say, "You're Mike Peters." I said, "Yeah." And they said, we hear you writing a song about the boxer Randolph Turpin." I said, "Yeah, what a great guy." I said, "Well, look, appreciate what you're trying to do, but for your future health, I would forget about it and drop it right now. And we never want to see that come out into the light of day." And it was pretty scary. And so I let it go at the time, and we never recorded it in 1987 prior to the hurricane because of that fact. But then 32 years later, I thought, I don't know if they'll be around anymore. I think I might just get away with it.
I don't know, Mike. I don't know, Mike. They might be like knocking on your door with their canes and going, "Hey, Mike, I told you not to do that song. Now we're going to come after you."
I don't know, but there's a big place in Llandudno, just down the coast, where we have our annual alarm gatherings, which we've held for 28 years annually now. There's a big cafe and a sort of hotel at the top of the mountain there, and it's dedicated. Randolph Turpin used to own it at one point in time, and it's got all of his boxing memorabilia in there, photographs, and a big depiction of him on the floor. And so I think the hurt and the tragedy of his story has subsided now, and people are just ready to remember that he was a champion. You know, he might have killed himself, he might have lost the return fight, but for 64 days, Randolph Turpin was the champion of the world. And it doesn't get much better than that if you've fought your way up from the streets like he did.
Well, to put it in perspective, Sugar Ray Robinson I believe he was, 131-1 coming into that match. He was the guy that nobody was going to beat. He was the Muhammad Ali of his era. He was the greatest boxer of all time at that time.
It was such a shock when Randolph Turpin beat him in London, and they went back to New York for the return. And Sugar Ray obviously switched on it, put his game face on it. I think it was Sugar Ray had come to Europe for a bit of an exhibition, money-making sort of tour, and probably didn't quite take Randolph Turpin as seriously as he should have done in that fight. And that's what can happen when you're 131 fights in, you've never been knocked out, you think you're invincible, and then that guy that you think, we've had it recently with AJ, Anthony Joshua, the British world champion of late, lost the fight to Anthony Ruiz and regained it, in a similar style. So hopefully that story won't be as tragic as the outcome that happened with Randolph Turpin.
Oh, it's nice to know you still do the gatherings at a place he used to own. There's a lot of history involved in this album, Stream Hurricane of Change. Mike Peters is with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio. There is a lot of you in this double album, Mike, from the new versions of late 80s alarm music, to the new tracks, to the stuff that you didn't get to release, the stuff that apparently you were threatened not to release, to your spoken essay. What would you like your longtime alarm fans from the early days on to learn about you and remember the most from Stream Hurricane of Change?
I think the important thing is to live. That's all I've been trying to do is live the life I've aspired to. And it's when obstacles are placed, a lot of people, it's easy to give up sometimes. When the tough times arrive, it's easy to feel overwhelmed and give in. But alarm fans know through the music and the life I've lived and the togetherness we've generated that there's always another way. There's a solution to most things. And even if that solution is giving something up forever or walking away from something, holding up the white flag, that can be a solution. It's not surrender. It's a solution. And that's what the Hurricane of Change is all about. It's about accepting that change is going to happen. You are going to be changed. Your life is going to change. The people around you are going to change. The circumstances will change. But life continues, and there's always something out there for every individual in the world. I know this through our engagement with our Love, Hope, Strength Foundation. We're always on the lookout for bone marrow donors and for people to save the lives of others. And we just see it happening all the time. Just when people are giving up, a match is found, and then their life continues. Or through our charity, we know that even if you can stay alive for 24 hours more than the doctor says you will, that's a beautiful gift. It might give you that one chance to say something meaningful to the people you love the most, or to hold somebody's hand that you thought you might have had to say goodbye to tomorrow, but you will do in this next moment. But to cling on to that life and have that extra 24 hours, it's all worth it.
Well, that's a good message. Mike Peters, I want to thank you very much for being with us on Revenge of the 80s Radio.
Thank you very much for having me on Revenge of the 80s. Great to be on the show. Thank you.
The 80s are back and with a vengeance. Let's play a track from Stream Hurricane of Change, and there is quite a lot to choose from. How about Irish Sea? New from Mike Peters and the Alarm on Revenge of the 80s Radio.